Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Dawn Falgout.
And I am your other host, Stephen Falgu. Get Recc'd is our occasional podcast where I will recommend something to Dawn and they will recommend something to me. And then we'll talk about it.
Yes.
And we're coming hot off our Halloween episode, back to normalcy. This is our Thanksgiving episode. So, thank you for being here.
For giving.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now you have to give us by supporting our Patreon. It's required by law. Unfortunately, so sorry to say.
Yeah. Well, it also doesn't exist. So just
Right,
Well,
so just wire it.
just wire it to our address at Get Recc'd Studios. You know where to find us. Yeah, I don't tend to do this, but I'm acknowledging the chat for one moment, everybody. If you are, let me know if our volumes are massively different, because they actually might be right now, and that would be entirely my fault. And if they're not, everything's cool. But anyway, yes, we just acknowledge that the chat exists. Mark that down as one of the 4 times in the past 3 years that we've ever done this. That's for y'all. It's special for Thanksgiving. I'm looking out for you.
What chat? What are you talking about?
Exactly. And I think that with that, we should move into what you recommended to me, Stephen.
Yes, last time I recommended to you the video game Super Auto Pets, which I believe came out this year. I only say that because I know it's been in beta for a little while on I/O specifically, and then definitely came to Steam. I believe in October. I'm pretty sure it's only been on I/O since summer of this year. Essentially, Super Auto Pets is an auto battler, which is a fairly new genre. It started as a Dota 2 mod, which in itself was a Warcraft 3 mod, so a mod to a mod. The idea is you create a team of units that faces off against an opponent's team of units, and the battles take place automatically. So you're really managing buying and selling units to create synergies in your team, or to upgrade your units by grabbing triples of the same unit. And as you go on, Super Auto Pets specifically, you have a certain amount of hearts, and you're trying to get a certain amount of wins. And they reintroduced a versus mode, which is more of a live mode, which is much more akin to some of the auto battlers of the past. But for the most part, what sets Super Auto Pets apart is that the actual primary mode is instanced, meaning instead of playing against a live set of opponents, you're playing against an instance of an opponent's team at a particular time. So Super Auto Pets is very casual in that you can kind of pick up and play it, and you're not on any sort of timer. So with that, I will hand it off to you to talk about.
Would it be wrong to call the game a deck builder? Do you feel like this genre is similar? Because I felt like it felt a lot like Slay the Spire or deck builders we've played physically.
Some have suggested that, and what's interesting about that comparison is that Super Auto Pets specifically is definitely taking more from the Hearthstone Battlegrounds realm of auto battlers, which are card-based auto battlers. So I don't think it's, I think it's apt to call it a deck builder, especially as you're thinking about each individual unit is a member of your deck or your squad, and those units have synergies with each other.
And also you have the thing of what are essentially card pulls and gold.
Right.
It reminds me of games we've played physically, like actual tabletop card games we've played physically, and also Slay the Spire. It's different than Slay the Spire, but I mean, the gameplay of it reminded me of that. It's a little bit superficial. I mean, I can see why it's being considered a different genre, but I feel like it at least is of the same breed.
Yeah,
You know?
especially if you're talking about, I know one of the things that we talked about in the past on this show is Legendary, the physical deck builders where you have
Right.
a constantly rotating shop of cards to pull from. It is very similar to that for sure.
That's the other thing that I couldn't put a name to, but yeah, that for sure. Which we also talked about on this show, and I feel like this is similar to that. Yeah, I mean, like, and I will say, from that angle, I think it's pretty well done. I mean, the one thing I enjoyed about the game, I think there's a lot of smart decisions that they have, in just the pure mechanical aspects of the game, like, which I can't say are altogether unique. I guess I don't know, but it reminded me enough of other games I've played to say that it isn't. But like stuff like, each pet that you get to pull from, they each have an ability related to either something that they might do when they attack, something that they might do before they attack, something that they might do when they die, something that they might do when you sell them in the shop round, things like that. They all have abilities that are related to actions in the game or in the battle that you take or that they take. And the goal, or I would say the strategy of the game, is building your team, or which I kind of viewed as your deck, up to boost each individual pet's abilities based off of the other ones. For example, something that I tried to do and something I saw other people who I was playing against to do was there's this one pet which is an elephant, and the elephant every time it's about to attack, it throws a rock behind itself at the pet behind it, damaging that pet. You would think, why would that ever be good? But there are pets that have effects that they give themselves when they take damage but don't die. So there's one example of this would be the elephant. You place the elephant in front of the peacock. The peacock has a decent amount of health, but very low damage. However, every time that it takes damage but doesn't die, it buffs its own damage by 2 points at its base level. So if you have the elephant, and you have the elephant with enough health so that it's able to prepare an attack without dying multiple times, such as to throw the rock behind itself onto the peacock enough to boost the peacock's damage, you can use both pets to enhance each other. There's also a camel that does a similar thing. That's just one example. There are many other examples that I saw people using and that I tried to use of pets working together, using each other's abilities mid-battle to buff each other up in the long run. Some towers, or I'm calling them towers, some pets, upon their death, spawn new pets that you can sort of use as a shield, or you can also use them to buff other towers that have abilities related to pets being summoned. So there's a lot of abilities that the pets have that are dependent on other pets, which is pretty interesting. And it's good for two reasons, because one, obviously it makes the gameplay more interesting, but it also makes learning the game more interesting. There's a benefit to learning each pet, what it does, and also how what it does might interact with another pet.
And one of the things I'll say, like, as a part of that is, any game like this, any competitive multiplayer free-to-play game has an intense learning curve. And Super Auto Pet specifically, I'll say, you already came in at a time when the meta of the game has been pretty well defined. So I'm sure we'll talk about like how you did, but I would expect that, it is very hard. But what I will say about Super Auto Pet specifically, which I enjoy so much, is that of this genre of games, of the auto battler genre of games, Super Auto Pets definitely has the lowest barrier to entry. I think I mentioned that last time. I still wouldn't say it's like an entirely casual game. There's a lot going on here, and especially as you pick it up, like, it can be quite overwhelming. But compared to other auto battlers, like other games in this genre, it's much easier to pick up and play. It also tends to be much shorter. The other thing about it, as I mentioned, is Super Auto Pets. The reason why I would call it more quote unquote casual than some of the others is because typically in the auto battler genre, you are always on the clock. The shop phase, the battle phase, you are on the clock against a lobby of players. So not only do you have the barrier of entry of like trying to just learn what all of the different things do, you also are timed. Whereas with Super Auto Pets, you actually have much more time in the shop phase to really think about it, read what the pets do, try to understand it, that sort of thing. So I think that's what really sets Super Auto Pets apart, which is really nice. I think that it is easily the easiest auto battler to get into. Now, the auto battler genre has kind of blown up to like pretty much weave its way into every different type of game. Like there are a ton of roguelite auto battlers that are coming out and other things like that. But from the specifically just pure competitive auto battler standpoint, Super Auto Pets has the easiest barrier to entry, and it's also very cute. All of the animals that we haven't mentioned this yet, but the whole game is built around emoji animals, like literally the emojis. Um, which is pretty fun. And there's a lot of little cute interactions between the animals and all that sort of thing.
Well, that's probably what makes it so accessible. I mean, like, it is pretty complicated, though I definitely think it's very readable. I think if you've ever played a game remotely like this or like a deck builder, like I have played other ones, I think you can understand it. Like, I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I was able to understand the game pretty fast. It takes a bit, you have to do a battle or two, but you pick it up. And I think a lot of that is honestly the visual presentation, because a lot of games make themselves feel complicated, maybe more than they actually are, just because of the way that it's presented to you. Um, this might be a completely crack comparison, but like, I think of when I tried to play League of Legends.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the game is definitely complicated, and I understand there's intricacies to it. But whenever I watch people play that game who know how to play it, the gameplay and what they end up doing throughout the round is pretty simple. But the way the game's presented to you, the amount of information that is thrown at you when you're in the menus or like understanding what to do or any of that kind of stuff is just so overwhelming. And like the visual presentation is so like bombastic that it becomes probably more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah, and I would append to that the visual quality of the game makes it so that not only is it more readable as you're playing, but it makes it easily, I mean 10 times easily more watchable on YouTube or Twitch than any of the other auto battlers, because one, you have a pretty straightforward back and forth, and the difference between this auto battler and some others is like your front unit attacks their front unit at the same time. So it's very readable to watch the interactions that are happening there. Versus if you try watching Hearthstone Battlegrounds, if you try watching like something like a Teamfight Tactics or even Auto Chess, which all these are kind of based off of, those games are not readable at all. If you don't know what's going on, you are not going to pick it up by watching. But if you watch Super Auto Pets, it's very straightforward to be able to like visually see what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, and also, and it's not even just that; it's also just the cuteness. The cuteness makes it more accessible. You know, it's not just the visual presentation and what they show you going on, but which is also done really well. I mean, in the middle of the battles, the animations and stuff make it very easy to read like what's happening. But also, it's cute. It's like, oh yeah, this is cute. It feels like a mobile game. It's presented in a very like easy.
And it is on mobile too, actually. I would
That
add.
definitely makes sense. Yeah, like it feels
Only
like
on
a mobile game.
Android, but
It feels like that. It has that presentation about it, and I think that's it. Honestly, it's a positive. It's also a negative in some other ways. I think like the most negative thing I can say about it, I do like the presentation overall, but it does come across very cheap, you know. And I feel like that's part of its art style. That's part of the point to it. but it still just feels very cheap. It feels like there's a lack of polish to a lot of it. I mean, even like the shop menu system just looks kind of bad. And like I appreciated that it was readable, and I think that probably that probably outweighs the fact that I found it to be kind of visually lacking, but I wouldn't have minded a little bit more flair than there was in the game. If I had to say anything negative about the visual presentation, but I think for
Yeah, and
yeah.
one thing I'll say, just as a disclaimer, we should mention, and I think I did kind of allude to it at the start, the game still is in beta technically, so just know that like anything we talk about could just be, because of early development, so maybe it'll change, but at least for right now, I just want to tailor all of our opinions to the
Right.
audience just by saying it is in beta, so this is not necessarily the final product.
Yeah, and like with that being said, there were technical issues I'm just going to completely excuse. Like I constantly got this message saying that I was disconnected even though I wasn't, but I was like, you know what, it's in beta, shit's gonna happen. So like there were a couple annoying things like that, but yeah. I assume, and I might be wrong, but I assume that this visual appearance is going to remain fairly steady throughout development. I can't see them like massively overhauling it. If they did, that would probably be nice. I think there's a lot of overhauling that could be done to it without losing the readability. There's definitely a point where they could go too far, and I think it being cutesy requires a certain level of simplicity, but it's a little rough around the edges. That's the only thing I'd say about that. But
Yeah,
you know
and
what?
I would say, and I don't know if you got into this. I'm guessing not. But for me, I just wanted to mention my one criticism about the game, and then I'll kind of let you finish, and we can
Sure.
wrap up. Um, my one criticism about the game, and other people have said this too, there are two packs of animals, and a pack is like all of the animals that you have to choose from the shop. One of those packs costs money, and if you have that pack, it's not available to all players. It's only available to players that have bought the pack. So there are animals that only people who have paid for the pack actually have the ability to use. Now, they did change this in the last update. The way that it works now is you can actually play against only your pack. So everyone is on the free pack or everyone is on the paid pack, or you can play against all packs. So my one criticism is just that, like, I feel like with a game like this, you really have to make everything available to everyone. But with the last update, they've definitely lessened my view on that criticism. As long as you're not, by paying, you don't have an inherent advantage, which at one point you did, although really the free pack is just by far and away better than the paid pack, I'll say. So I don't know, maybe that's kind of bad in and of itself. But anyway, as long as you don't have an inherent advantage by paying, I don't think it's that much of an issue anymore. But I did want to call it out because it was one of the big complaints, like, before the last update.
Sure, yeah. The thing I was trying to jump to was my biggest problem that I had with this game, and like, I don't know, take it with a grain of salt, because I was a beginner to the game, and I played quite a lot of it. I mean, it goes so fast, you don't even have to spend that much time to play a lot of this game. The battles go quickly. Replaying is easy to jump back in, and I found it quite addicting while I was playing it, so it was very easy to just keep recycling, and every time I lost, just keep going. But this game, I gotta be real, this was the most frustrating shit. Like, this fucking game with these cute little pets and these funny little pets that throw rocks and do cute things pissed me off so much. This was so frustrating to play. And it felt like, there's an element of luck to the game. There's also definitely an element of strategy and skill and learning. And I noticed both things, and I'm fine with that. But there's something about the way it feels to get rolled in this game, like to just get steamrolled, that just is so upsetting and frustrating. And I think a lot of it must be because there's probably a community that's come up with metas for the game that I'm not clued in on. Because I would go a couple battles through and I would see people with builds that I was just like, how in the fuck does that pet have that much health in this round? Like, how did you build this? I could never. I would watch things people would do that worked for them, and I would try to do them for myself, and they never worked whenever I tried to do them. And like, I was trying to learn people's strategies, and it just wasn't happening. And even as I was getting better, I would still just constantly get steamrolled by people's ridiculous fucking setups. I don't know how they possibly managed to get. And like, there's something very frustrating about that. Like, I guess it's a game you have to learn. Maybe you have to watch people play. Maybe you have to watch YouTube videos and gather strategies about it and that kind of thing. But like, it was just very annoying. There's one mechanic that the game has which I just really don't like, and I'm not sure I really understand why it's there. So you have to win 10 games to, I assume, win something. I don't know, but there's like a max. There's like a 0 out of 10 trophies, and every time you get a trophy from winning a battle, it goes up. So I don't know what happens when you reach 10, but I'm guessing that's victory or whatever. So you also have lives, right? So every time you lose a battle, you lose lives. If the battle's a draw, you don't lose lives. You also don't get a trophy. If the battle's a win, you get a trophy. That's how it works. 10 lives, 10 trophies that you need to get. There's also tiers. So as you go through each battle, as you go through multiple battles, you'll get to a new tier where you will unlock a better set of pets, or at least somewhat better set of pets, with new kinds of abilities, generally higher health and damage than the first tier pets. And you start playing against other players who are at a similar level that you are. So you're basically always battling people at around the same tier and level. I would have to assume that's how it's built, because it definitely felt that way. So the one thing that I found really fucking stupid, and that really made this game very frustrating, was that each tier that you get to, you start to lose more lives per loss. So you start with 10 lives, and in tier 1, each loss is 1 life. Totally reasonable, right? Then you get to tier 2, and it's like 2 lives. Then you get to 3, and it's like 3. So early on in the game, when you start to lose battles, you know, because you only lost 1 life, you still have quite a bit of time to recover. And sometimes you kind of require that. Like, sometimes you need to lose a battle or two because your build's just not good enough, but you have a good feeling that, you know, you're freezing the right items, you're rolling for the right items, and you're getting the right pets and that kind of thing, to bounce back. But as the game goes on more and more, and as other people's builds are starting to get absolutely insane to levels that I couldn't even read and understand how the hell they got them, now, every time you lose against these players, you are getting way, way, way less time to bounce back. So if you don't, from the very beginning, have like the perfect fucking strategy and plan, you get absolutely screwed, like so fast. And you could say, well, if they didn't make the lives go down faster, it'd be easier to win. Well, yeah, with 10 trophies, maybe, but you could just increase the trophy count. Then you could have the same general system, the same general difficulty to get to the total amount of trophies, but more time to bounce back from losses later in the game, when losses start to get more devastating and you've sunk more time into the game up to that point and they start to hurt more. So it's like, maybe it does make it go faster. It definitely does make it go faster, but I didn't really see the point of that. I feel like I wouldn't have gotten so angry playing this fucking stupid pet game. Whereas if I always lost 1 life per loss, you know, gave me a little bit more time to re-prepare and think about shit after losing some crazy fight where somebody just had the stupidest selection of pets I've ever seen. Like, that would have been nice. I don't know. Like, it being addicting probably made that even worse. Games that you just constantly want to try and try and try again can sometimes be the most aggravating, because you get used to losing and losing and losing more and more. Or it's like, it hooked me too much. So is this a problem with Super Auto Pets, or is this a problem with me? I don't know. But it's odd that it was this game that I feel like has made me the most mad of any game I have played in a really, really long time.
So it's interesting that you call that out, actually, because that is new. That is incredibly new. In fact, that didn't change until the last few days. Because before, the way that it worked is it was 10 trophies and 4 lives. And every loss was 1 life lost. In the most recent patch, they changed it now to have 10 lives, and as you mentioned, you lose those lives on a sliding scale. Like it becomes you lose exponentially more lives as you tier up. I agree with you. I think it's a bad change. The reason why they did it is so that way early losses don't affect you as much as before. Because when you only had 4 lives, if you lost if you had a loss round 1, round 2, you're already 50% of the way to being dead. However, now I feel like it's even worse. Yes, that is true. Now, if you lose in the early rounds, you don't get punished as much. But one thing about the game is like those, as you mentioned, those later rounds are so important to your scaling, to your unit scaling, that now you really can't do that anymore. If your units aren't scaled already, you're losing 3 lives at a time and you can die almost immediately. I think it's a bad change. I 100% agree with
That's
you.
really
It is a
funny.
really new change.
That's actually really funny. So I don't know how I would feel about the 4 lives, to be honest, because that also sounds kind of awful. I mean, honestly, I just think it should be more forgiving in general. But if I had to make a call between it being more punishing in the early rounds or later rounds, I would call the earlier rounds, to be completely honest with you, because if early on in the game I realize I'm screwed, I can just restart. But if I've already sunk in all the time and played a bunch of battles and I have a deck that I'm getting pretty confident in and then I start to get fucking destroyed, that's what makes me mad. That's what makes it frustrating. Like, I feel like I wouldn't mind as much if I got screwed in like the first 2 rounds and be like, all right, time to restart. But you get screwed in like the fucking 7th or 8th, it's a much bigger hit. So here's what I'll say. Hearing that, I don't think it should be 4 lives. I don't think it should be 10 with scaling. I think it should just be 10 lives, 1 life lost per battle, and they should increase the amount of trophies you have to win. That would be my call. If you want to find a balance and pick like 7 or something, that's fine. But the scaling thing's stupid. I think at that point it kind of defeats the purpose to even have the number be 10, because it's like you don't actually ever have 10 losses that you can have. It's always going to be less than 10 losses you're allowed, no matter what, just because of the way that it works. So I didn't understand that.
Yeah, then to your other point, I kind of alluded to it before, but yeah, I definitely agree with you. The meta has evolved so quickly and in such a way that I can't imagine what it's like to be a new player getting into this game now, because the the burden of knowledge on you, even though, as I mentioned, it is much more accessible, has accelerated so much. Plus, to your point about scaling life loss, it's incredibly difficult to pick everything up now. I mean, I'll tell you, one of the things that I think is really interesting about the game, but is not communicated really at all, is there are a ton of interactions that happen in the shop that you would not expect. So units that scale, and specifically don't say until end of battle, will retain that scaling if it happens in the shop. So I'm going to get very specific because I know that you've played and other people may have played as well. So take the dog, for instance. The way that the dog works, when a friend is summoned, then the dog gets either attack or health buffed. Well, summon also includes actually buying a unit and putting it into a space in the shop round. And if you do that in the shop round, the dog scales, and that scaling is permanent. What a lot of people do is they take a dog and just use it with a unit that summons something when it dies in battle. But no, the real way you're supposed to use the dog is actually, scale it up a ton in the shop round, and that's how people get like giant animals already at like turn 6 or 7.
That makes
So
perfect sense.
There's a lot of units like that it's not explicitly stated that the shop round buffs are permanent, but that's like one portion of the meta that's just evolved so much, and I feel like should be communicated better.
Yeah, that makes it's. I love that you used that example because it was the dog horse thing that I was trying to do, and I kept getting screwed by other people doing the dog horse thing, and I was
Yep.
like, "What is going on?" And now I get it, and that is stupid because it just straight up would never occur to you that would happen. Considering that when it summons mid battle, the dog only scales temporarily.
In the battle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I'll say. Like, that's another portion where I feel like they need to communicate stuff like that a little better. Like, for instance, the horse, as you mentioned, you called out the horse, right? The horse, when something's summoned, the horse gives it attack.
Including in
In the
shop.
shop, in the shop round, if you summon something, the horse will give it attack, but that attack is not permanent.
Right.
So it's very, unless you really know those intricacies right now, anyway, it's hard as a new player, I feel like, to like, understand those and pick up on those.
Interesting. I'm glad to hear your knowledge on that. That enlightened me a lot. That makes a lot of sense because I got to be real. Some of the stuff I saw people doing, I was like, "Did you buy something? Like, did you spend real money to do this?" Because I just didn't understand. But anyway, um, we can wrap it up now. I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll say this. I think this is a well designed game for what it is. I think it's a kind of almost like a mobile-ish feeling kind of game, addicting. Uh, Overall, I think maybe I'm changing my opinion on this, hearing new information, but I felt that it was well communicated and readable while I was playing it. Um, I also felt that this made me really mad, and I didn't enjoy it. I think I enjoyed it for a while, but the more I enjoyed it, the less I enjoyed it. The more I wanted to play it, the less I enjoyed playing it. It was one of those kinds of games. So I definitely can't call it a bad game. And I think I do like the game overall. I'd probably give it a 6 if I had to give it a rating. And the reason I put that number on it is one, because I think the game itself isn't the most like bombastic, amazing thing ever or anything like that. But it's good for what it is, and it does its style well. It just pissed me off a lot, so I didn't like it a ton. But I don't know if I'd recommend the game. I think if you're a new player like me, do more research than I did. Look into these metas, learn about this stuff, because the experience of trying to learn it yourself, as pure and fun as that could be, it is incredibly annoying and terrible, and I don't think you should subject yourself to it. And that is all that I have to say.
Yeah, and I'll say, and I don't know if this really came across at all to this point yet, but I absolutely adore this game. I am so addicted. I've played so much. I've watched so much of it. So the other thing I'll mention is like I had the good fortune, I guess, or good grace of getting in like right when it hit Steam and playing. So I kind of, evolved my own gameplay as the meta evolved. So I had that kind of benefit going in, and I feel like that's why the game's never really felt frustrating to me, because I've always, as I've played more and more, the game, like people in the game have gotten better and better along with myself. So I have a really good grasp and understanding of it. But as a new player, and this is kind of why I actually recommended it to you, because I'd be interested just from a new player experience, because it's only really been out for a couple months and already people have gotten so much better. There is a downside to that. I feel like one thing about Super Auto Pets, which is different from some of the other auto battlers, which I'm obsessed with, like that genre in general. I play a lot of Hearthstone Battlegrounds as well. I feel like Super Auto Pets is very specific in the interactions that happen, and especially now, it is very hard to find like new ways to play. A lot of Super Auto Pets rounds, if you're playing optimally, kind of end up being exactly the same every time. You're looking for one or maybe two, even maybe three specific build types, and if you don't get those, you just straight up lose. I don't know how they're going to fix that, honestly. Something like a Hearthstone Battlegrounds and like Teamfight Tactics and those sorts of games, there are a lot more interactions that occur between units. Things like units that have some specific tag to them, like they are this type of archetype of unit, and as you get more of that archetype, you get special benefits. So like every game is very different. Now Super Auto Pets has become so very specifically itself that I don't know how they're going to evolve it from here. But with that being said, I'm still very well addicted to it. I give it an 8. I don't think it's the best auto battler out there. I think it's the easily most accessible, as we both mentioned, it's very hard for a new player right now. But even still, like just being able to pick up and play and starting to understand auto battlers as a genre, I think this is a great place to start. And then maybe even going from here to something else. Although I'll say, from although I will. Okay, so one thing I will tailor. Although it probably is the most accessible auto battler from the sense of like mechanically and being able to understand it, it's not necessarily the most accessible in terms of the competition that you have. Whereas in other auto battlers, you have either an ELO ranking system or an MMR ranking system. So you'll be matched up against, players of your same skill level. Super Auto Pets has nothing like that. You're literally instanced against any player who's playing at any given time. So it's easy for a new player from a mechanic standpoint, but not necessarily from a competitive landscape. So with that being said, I recommend it. It's free. I feel like, if you're interested at all, it's very cutesy. It's very easy to get into. A lot of streamers are playing it right now, so you can watch a little bit and understand. You could pick it up and play it. But there are other free auto battlers out there too, so this might be kind of an entryway into the genre, and then you can explore more from there.
Great. Okay, I guess we can move on to what I recommended to you, Steven.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so last time I recommended to Steven the 1968 sci-fi film 2001: A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick. I don't think it needs much more introduction than that. And I'll just let Steven talk about it.
Okay, I have a hot take. And maybe it's in our blood. But this movie is so boring. I just have such a hard time watching this movie. I have tried to watch this movie at least 4 times in my lifetime, and every time I fall asleep. I didn't fall asleep this time. I actually watched the movie all the way through, and it bores the hell out of me. The reason why I say it might be in our blood is because our parents, this was their first date, and our
Yeah.
mother fell asleep. So maybe I got that gene.
And our dad loves this film.
Oh yeah, he absolutely loves it. Here's the thing, what I'll say. It's like technically this is incredible to watch, with with the framing that it is a 1968 film. It is incredible. The effects, just some of the scenes and shots and things that are occurring, and even like thinking about a lot of the mechanics of the universe that are created here. Like this is before we put someone on the moon, and the way that they understand space travel and space dynamics is insane to me. Technically, it is a marvel. The cinematography is incredible. The direction, the shots, so much of this is a masterpiece, and I just cannot get into it. No matter how many times I've tried, I just cannot. So this is going to be a hot take one, because I know we are definitely going to be split on this one.
I'm so happy that you think that. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm so happy. I don't know why I thought that you did. I guess maybe you'd said it before or something, or I had some indication that you were because. Anyway, you sounded like you were continuing your thought, but I just want you to know I'm very, very happy you have that take. I was hoping for this kind of a discussion, so that's pretty awesome.
I think that's probably all the first things I'll have to say about it. The other thing I would just say quickly is like the score is also just incredible. I mean, so much of it. Okay, I'm a huge sci-fi fan, and this is like a marvel in the sci-fi genre, especially at the time, truly. And it's so easy to see the workings of science fiction in cinema, and the way that this movie then went on to define and also influence so many films. I mean, one film that we talked about somewhat recently is Alien. It is very easy to see a lot of the bones of Alien from this movie. This film takes a much more dialogue less approach than so many other films that I've seen, truly. I mean, it is honestly more of an like ambient movie than anything else, truly. At times it's just sound, whether that be some sort of musical track or just, ambient noise or something occurring. And that is so well defining of what I believe science fiction to be, but especially this framing of science fiction, like a space movie. Space is silent, truly. So, like, having just ambience is such an interesting way to showcase that.
Well, and
But I find it incredibly boring.
well, and space is silent in this film. When there's no score and you're in space, there's no sound at all. This film. There are scenes where characters are in space, spoilers for 2001: A Fucking Space Odyssey. So if you've never seen it, spoilers. But there's in the scene where one of the two characters on the Jupiter mission is killed by Hal. In most scenes out in space during that section, you hear the sound of the inside of the space people's of their spacesuit, of their helmet. So you hear like them breathing. When he is killed and disconnected, and there's no longer any sound in his helmet because he's no longer breathing, and you're in space, the film is completely silent, like dead silent. There's no sound at all. So it treats space and space travel as realistically as humanly possible, right down to space being silent. And I love that space is silent in this film, because there's so many movies where you're in space and there's fucking sound, and it's really stupid. There would not be sound, you know. It doesn't have to be the most realistic film ever to at least get that right, I would hope. It's always kind of a little bit distracting to me personally. Maybe it's only because I've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, but also this film came out in the 60s, so, you know, what's your excuse? But yeah, I feel like space travel-wise, while we're talking about that, I don't know if it's possible to think of another film that's portrayed it as creatively, but also dryly and realistically as possible. You know, there's long sections of the second portion of this film where you just watch characters walking around in these space stations doing things that people who exist in space stations would do before this kind of shit was a thing. And they're doing crazy stuff. Like, you see them walking up walls, you know, running around inside of giant, like, upside down and stuff. But the characters treat it like this is just another day for them. And it's all portrayed so realistically that it's definitely amazing. And you can see why people think that Stanley Kubrick directed the hoax moon landing. You know, that's the big conspiracy, that he directed the moon landing. And, you know, who better to have done that if that conspiracy is true, which it obviously isn't. But if it were, it probably would be him. It's very funny that Steven says that it runs in the family, because if that's the case, then you must have mom's anti-Space Odyssey gene, and I must have dad's pro-Space Odyssey gene, which is hilarious. I never thought of it that way. But, like, yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, this is probably the greatest film ever made. I feel like this movie does a film as a piece of art better than any other movie I've ever seen in my life. And by quite a bit. Even compared to other Kubrick films, which we have talked about, The Shining, which is a brilliant film. But there's something that he captured in this movie that it's not only amazing for sci-fi, it's not only a giant spectacle, which it still is. I mean, most of these effects are miniatures, literal rotating rooms, like very physical, practical things that I feel like a lot of these effects are still unparalleled, you know? Just in the creativity, the visual spectacle of this movie. And that's one of the things I think is so incredible about this film, is that this is a film. You watch this to watch it. It is a visual product. And a movie can be a lot. Movies can take together elements of many different mediums of art. You know, even stuff like painting. But of course, like, you'll have matte paintings in films. But, you know, aside from that, obviously music, sound, and all of those things, photography, all of these things can come together to create a movie that's, you know, it uses all of these things greater than the sum of its parts. And 2001 definitely does do that, but it also excels most in communicating its message and its themes and its ideas visually. Like, and that to me is just breathtaking. This is a movie that when I watch it, I just have to stand in awe at how gargantuan and immense this movie is. You like when this movie's over, it feels like I've just witnessed the largest thing that exists. It's so huge and vast, and the ideas that it's communicating are so potent and thought-provoking that it's like it just kind of leaves me breathless. It's like this huge, massive journey. It's the only film that truly manages to feel like you've really well, not the only film, sorry, but it's a film that really truly manages to feel like you've actually experienced something. Like, it's not just like a great story that you watched. It's not just like an impressive collection of scenes and acting and stuff like that. All of that's there, but like in and of itself, it is an experience to just be marveled at. You get out of it and you feel so small. It puts humanity into perspective like nothing else I've ever seen. And for sci-fi too, what more could you possibly want? Like, I feel like this is the essence of science fiction, this movie. It's one, because it's very believable. Everything that you see is very believable. There's a fantastical element to it, but it's very grounded, ironically, for being in space. But it also has something legitimately interesting and thought-provoking to say about the nature of science and how it interacts with humanity, which I feel like is what science fiction is designed to do. But in most films, it just ends up being a set piece in and of itself, and nothing more than that. Like in, Star Wars or something like that. Sci-fi is a set piece. It's a setting. But here, it's an idea. It's a concept. And I'm being vague because I want to open discussion after. But that's, I think, to me, what makes this film so fucking genius. Like, and unforgettable to me.
Would you perhaps call it, then, perchance, an epic drama of adventure and exploration?
I might have to call it an epic drama of adventure and exploration, yes.
My issue is that I don't necessarily disagree with anything you said. Like, I watch this film and I can understand and appreciate the artistry at work here. And the thing is, I very much like Kubrick. I can't think of any. Well, that's not true. I was gonna say I can't think of any Kubrick movies that I don't like, but didn't he direct some like really trash family comedies like later in his life?
I think you're thinking of somebody else that's not Kubrick.
No. I believe. Hold on.
I'm watching through his discography, his filmography right now. You're thinking of somebody else. David Lynch did that. I think David Lynch did a family comedy at one point or something. I don't know, but
and I really enjoy the writing of Arthur C. Clarke. So it's like this should be the culmination of one of my favorite directors and one of my favorite writers of all time. But for some reason, just when I watch this film, it does not connect with me in any meaningful way. Again, I can appreciate everything that's going on here, so it's hard for me to not rate it well, but there's just not enough, like, the artistry at work in this film drags itself along in such a way, and the runtime is in such a fashion that I feel like every little set piece or every little portion of life that's unfolding in this film drags on too long. There's not much going on. It's very hard for me to really want to pay attention, honestly. Even the beginning of the film, where there literally is no dialogue because it's like pre-humans, right? What it's trying to tell about human society and the advancement of civilization is interesting, but not interesting to me. Like, not interesting in the fact that I want to actually watch it. It drags itself too long. It is not engaging or captivating, and that's what I feel about the entirety of this movie. Now, what I think is kind of interesting about that is that in a way, space is both the most interesting and captivating thing and the least interesting and captivating thing that there is. Right? There could be everything out there or nothing. And so it's interesting to me that that's how I like read this film too, because in a way that's a portion of what this is trying to say, but I just cannot connect with it at all. As big of a fan of all things that are going on here, it just is so boring to me.
I think if we boil it down, I think your problem is that the movie's slow.
It is incredibly slow. That does not help. I will definitely add that. That does not help.
But I mean, because this movie is like, this is not a slow movie. This is like a grindingly slow movie, like where every shot and sequence just sits. Like there's a scene where they're going to the moon, and you'll just sit there and watch the spaceship very slowly lower itself onto the platform for like minutes on end. Sequences where you're staring at spaceships just slowly floating in space, set to music. And I think people who find this movie boring, I think that's why they find it boring. I think. Because I feel like if you took everything that was at play here and sped it up, I think a lot more people would be able to get on board. Like, but anyway, and that's fine. Like, I understand that. I think anybody who likes this movie should be able to understand why somebody wouldn't be able to get into it. For me, I think the fact that this movie is like the slowest fucking thing ever kind of is what makes it so incredible. I sit there and marvel at every single image that is presented here. And like when Kubrick's the cinematography in this film is absolutely spectacular. It's unlike anything else. It is so remarkable. It's so amazing. Every single shot in this movie, like it is in itself a work of art that you could sit and ponder at. And you get the time to do that. For every single image, you get the time to sit there and marvel at the breathtaking shot composition, color, framing. Like, it... And there's this atmosphere that this movie has that it captures because of that slowness. It's dreadful. The entire Jupiter mission sequence with Hal slowly taking out the crew is just the most expertly directed sequence of events I think I've ever seen in a film. Like, the methodical pace to everything. You sit there and ruminate in this isolating environment with this supercomputer that can kill you. You know something, it's going to kill these people. Like, but you just sit there and reflect on it and what that might mean. This entire Jupiter mission section. I actually forgot this, but rewatching the film, I remembered there's an intermission in the movie. Like, in the middle of the movie, there's an intermission, and it's in the middle of the Jupiter mission. And in the intermission, it's playing this terrifying music where you just sit there in just dread. It's just like, oh God, you know. And the use of music in general is astonishing. I mean, the music that the piece that plays when they find the monolith, that like choral piece where all the voices are warbling on top of each other and slowly joining. It's like the scariest thing you've ever seen. This film has moments that are far more scary than the vast majority of horror films. It builds this horror of just vastness that you're so alone, that this technology is so far complicated beyond human comprehension that we have to sit in awe of it. which is core to what I find to be the movie's main theme, which is that of humanity's progression alongside our tool use. That humanity's evolution is based upon our ability to use and understand our own tools, which of course opens with the Dawn of Man sequence, where early man meets the monolith and then discovers its first tool. Prior to using this bone that early man discovers, they're being hunted by cheetahs. They're unable to find food. They have to hide at night. But once they get the bone, they become the dominant species in this area. They are able to both separate themselves from other primates that haven't learned how to use the bone yet, but they're also killing animals you once saw them living beside, unable to do anything about, right? So that happens. The human throws the bone into the sky, and the bone transitions into a spaceship, which that one transition communicates how far our tools have come from a bone to a spaceship, that all of humanity's technological progression has led to space travel, right? Which is then the next sequence of the film. But then, with the Jupiter mission, which happens after humanity finds the monolith again, in the Jupiter mission, we now have a tool that isn't even serving us anymore. It has now surpassed our intellect and our ability, which is artificial intelligence. And HAL 9000, this piece of tech, which is what it is now basically a new species that is now dominating us, separating us from each other, separating us from it, carving out its own lane and its own ability to use the exact technology that we once used for ourselves. And it is only then, once Dave disconnects this artificial intelligence in a scene, by the way, that is like surprisingly emotional, as he's taking apart Hal and listening to Hal plead for its own existence, like one by one, piece by piece, as Hal's intelligence gets broken down bit by bit, and each sentence and statement it's able to utter becomes more and more technological and programmed, which is just a really fucking cool detail. But only after Dave disconnects the computer, the tool that surpassed us, is he sent to the Stargate and all of that, when eventually the monolith sends him back to Earth as like a reborn superhuman. This is the story of the movie, and it's presented in a series of stories. I mean, each section of the film tells a different story with a different character until the last two, where Dave becomes like the central character throughout it. And by doing that, we're able to really disconnect like the overall concept from how tiny and small these characters actually are in the grand scheme of this process. Even once we focus on Dave as a character, the dialogue still remains super minimal, because it's not about that. This isn't a movie about characters. This isn't a movie you could read in a book. The story, of course, came from a short story by Arthur C. Clarke, but it's a story and a message that only a film like this could tell you. And how many movies can you say that about? Like, how many movies can you say that communicated an idea I don't think any other medium could have possibly communicated? I can't think of any. I really can't. Yeah.
Should we wrap it up?
Sure.
It's very hard for me to rate this. I won't recommend it. I mean, for me, it's almost unwatchable. But everything that you said, I 100% agree with. Like the cinematography here, the score, the ideas, it's all incredible. It just is too slow and does not connect with me. So with that, I guess I have to give it, it's so hard. I guess I give it like a 5, like right down the middle. I won't tailor that score so much because I find it unwatchable, because I do very well appreciate the artistry here. But I don't know. When I go see a movie, I'm not hoping for art's sake. There are very artsy movies that I enjoy quite a lot, but this is not one of them.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the difference, because I think that as I'm watching more films, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for films that are in themselves pieces of art to think about. And there's just nothing better than this. Like I don't know if I'd call it my favorite movie. I mean, it probably is. Every time I watch it, I feel like it's the greatest thing I've ever witnessed in my life. Like, as far as art goes. So I guess that would make it my favorite film. I'm not going to say it's a go-to film, though. I feel like every time I watch this, I have to set aside a day for it. And I don't think the runtime's crazy. It's like 2.5 hours or something. It's a long movie, but there's longer movies out there. But it's just the pace of it alongside that length is very long, and feels very long. And it's such an exhausting experience to watch, that it's hard to just put it on for fun. But like, you know, I'd say probably I'd say Birdman's probably my favorite movie. But this is, I do feel like this is the greatest film I've ever seen. I feel like this is, to me, the prime contender for greatest film of all time, because it has all of those elements, but it also elevates film as an art form. Not necessarily storytelling. And I think that's going to be the big thing that's going to turn people off from the movie. It's not a movie that's about telling a story. I mean, it does do that, but the story is communicated through symbols and concepts, and not through any conventional means. It's very much a visual affair, and giving you these concepts visually, the dialogue's so sparse, and it doesn't communicate these ideas very often. It's a film you have to like sit and ruminate about every image and thought, like, and thing that's being presented to you. And if that sounds really exhausting, it is really exhausting. So I think a lot of people are just not going to be able to connect with that. But to me, I mean, I give it, I mean, easily, I give it a 10. I can't think of anything else I ever could give it. And I think everybody should watch this movie. I think even if you think you're going to be bored out of your mind, you should watch this movie. This is like a landmark. And it's something unlike anything else you've seen. No matter how many movies you've seen set in space or sci-fi films, this is completely on another level. And I mean, you should at least watch it for that Stargate sequence with all the crazy colors and shit alone. Because if you've never done drugs but you want to, that's a very good thing for that. So, which I didn't even mention that scene, but you know, yeah, and that's pretty much it. So I guess we move on to our recommendations for next time.
Yep, let's do it.
All right, you go first.
Okay, so for next time, I am going to recommend an album. This is a pretty recent album, actually. I'm going to recommend Phoebe Bridgers' Punisher. This was a 2020 release. Phoebe Bridgers kind of came out of a California indie rock scene, had a breakout album in 2017. This is their second studio album. So next time we will talk about Punisher.
And Steven, I am recommending to you a film. The film is called Across the Universe. This is a film directed by Julie Taymor. It is a film prominently featuring the music of some band that I just cannot for the life of me remember the name of. There's some British band, I think they like insects or something like that. We've talked about like the band before.
The Rolling Stones.
The band of the Rolling Stones. Yeah, the band of like individuals who take fascination in some sort of insect or something like that. Yeah, and it's a musical film that prominently features that music of Oasis. So that's what I'm recommending to you for next time. And that pretty much does it for this episode. As always, I should let you know that if you're listening on Castbox, we do these live on YouTube. You can watch them live at the channel Casting 404. And if you are listening to us on YouTube, we are in Castbox at a Get Recc'd. I try to put these episodes up whenever I can. I haven't put the last few up, but as soon as this episode goes live on YouTube, or goes up on YouTube after we finish this live streaming thing, I will work on putting those up. And on Castbox, you can download our podcast and listen to us on the go. And that's all I really have to say about that, just as always.
Yeah, thank you everyone for listening in or watching live. If you're watching live with us, we appreciate it. Again, this was a Thanksgiving episode, so thank you. And now you have to give legally.
Yeah,
It's
all
required.
of your money, every single last penny to Get Recc'd Studios. And I guess that's it then. So I will close things off here because those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations